Hello, and welcome back to Perligo Ponders, the monthly or perhaps more frequently released videos in which I respond to your comments, questions, and theories about my own comments, questions, and theories regarding to 21 Pilots. We're here at the end of the month of July, and it has been a somewhat surprisingly quiet month for the band. Although perhaps when we look back at June, it's not entirely shocking that July was as quiet as it was. I'll get into that in a moment. But while we didn't receive any new singles or anything like that in July, we did receive the full confirmed track list for their upcoming album Breach, as well as a release countdown and a confirmed release date for that album, which is now set at September 12th, not September 5th, as we originally believed. And the other exciting thing that happened for me personally in July is that I finally received in the mail my copy of the Doubt demo single vinyl. I think you can see it better over there. I saw a number of people receive theirs right when they were supposed to, back in June, and I only just got mine. Perhaps in a later video or as a short or something, I'll go into further depth about why this song was originally titled Galveston. I think it's quite interesting that it was, but that is a topic for another day. Now, as I just mentioned a moment ago, July was surprisingly quiet for 21 Pilots, but not shockingly so. Yes, we did all, myself included, believe that we would be getting another single off of Breach this month. And even if it wasn't directly a month after the contract came out, it's still surprising they haven't put out any new music in July when they're teasing an upcoming album. However, with that said, in the song The Contract, Tyler does very clearly say, "I'm just trying to stay quiet," and then proceeds for the next month and a half to stay quite quiet. And all of us are wondering why he's keeping his word this time. But with that being said, we have a good number of comments that have come in this month to respond to, so let's get into them without any further delay. The first comment that we have comes from Adam HC4EC, and he writes, "Question for the next Perligo Ponders. Is the bottom of the logo on Josh's bass drum broken? I know it's a drum microphone hole, but I've looked at old drum heads, and the hole is never breaching the bottom of the circle, breaking the cycle. I love the content, keep it up." Thank you for watching and supporting. This is an interesting question. I'm afraid it's not new to the Clancy tour or the Clancy era, or now I guess the Breach era. We've seen this microphone hole kind of breaking the circle of the 21 Pilots logo ever since Trench, if not before. It's pretty common for the microphone hole to be where it is at the bottom of the bass drum. And while it would be cool if they're designing their drum with that in mind, I don't think that's the case here, because if so, you'd have to make the argument that breaking the circle in the Blurryface era was intentional, which doesn't quite fit with the story that they were telling during Blurryface, and so on, right? Like the breach of the cycle is only something that's happening in Clancy and Breach, not Blurryface, Trench, or Skilled and Icy. So while I do think that there are a number of interesting and cool things that they're doing with this new version of the logo that was introduced during Clancy, in which the bars of the symbol are touching the circle around it and so on, I don't think that this in particular is really something that we can draw any kind of significance from. But thank you for watching, and I hope to see some more interesting comments from you soon. Our next comment is from Joseph Enrique, and he writes, "In the Clancy music video's premiere livestream, Tyler said the Torchbearer has the ability to guide, and so that's why there is this kind of like a triangular existence of him. He also said Bandito Torchbearer is the real one. What did he mean by triangular existence?" This is an interesting question. I think it's pretty easy to answer if you adopt my theory of the Torchbearer as we see him throughout the lore and the story. Basically, there are three versions of the Torchbearer, and I delve into this somewhat in my video on the Torchbearer. So I won't belabor the point here for the sake of, not repeating things over and over again. But to put it simply, there are three versions of the Torchbearer. There's the real one, the Bandito one, as Tyler has confirmed. That is the real one. Then there is a version of the Torchbearer which was created by Nico and kind of projected onto Clancy's mind during the Skilled and Icy tour. So that's the version of Josh that we see during Skilled and Icy, and who everyone thought was acting kind of weird and didn't seem like the real Torchbearer that we'd seen up until that point, mainly in Trench in that storyline. Then, as a result of that projection, there is a version of the Torchbearer that Clancy himself creates in his own mind, even after Nico has lost the ability to project that onto him. So after the events of Saturday and the shipwreck, Clancy is freed from Dema and able to escape to the island of Voltsoy. And in that process, after Keon's betrayal allowing him to escape, the control that Nico had over Clancy's mind begins to subside, and he's no longer able to project the Torchbearer onto his mind, but the damage has been done, and Tyler now begins to create his own version of the Torchbearer in his loneliness on the island of Voltsoy. And it is this version who introduces him to the power of seizing, and so on, and this version which disappears when confronted by the real Torchbearer in navigating, the Bandito Torchbearer. So that's what I interpret the triangular existence to be referring to. There's these three versions, they all triangulate around Clancy, and they all shape and influence him and the path that he takes in various ways, but only one of them is the real Torchbearer, and he's struggling now to guide and influence Clancy on the right path, as we see throughout the FPE letters and the Clancy tour. Somewhat in contrast to the idea that I have about the Torchbearer and his role in the story, Ion K7U wrote this comment, and it's quite long, and I don't have tons and tons of response to this particular one, but I mainly wanted to just highlight it because it's an interesting idea. And in some, I somewhat disagree, but we'll get into that in a moment. He writes, Perligo ponders, I wanted to drop an idea after watching your video on the Torchbearer and the idea that Nico created an evil version of him. I think it needs to be slightly tweaked, but is possibly correct. 1. There are 4 types or versions of the Torchbearer: the Voltsoy, Bandito, Red Eyes, and Skeleton Icy. I think all of them are good guys except for the Red Eyes Josh, because the Skeleton Icy Josh puts yellow tape on the submarine in Saturday, Voltsoy Josh leads him to the Bandito Josh to overthrow Dema. 2. Tyler Joseph is a Christian, and it is likely the Torchbearer is a nod to God, as we see 3 versions of the Torchbearer, just like in faith. There is the Trinity of God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, or God the Father, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. But the Red Eyes Josh is an infestation of doubt against God. Clancy feels betrayed by the Torchbearer because he used to feel closer, but when times get hard, it became very hard to feel loved by the Torchbearer, just like with God, even though it was the Torchbearer who saved Clancy and Nico and the Niners. And I think Nico sees the doubt Clancy has in the Torchbearer and further pushes it in hopes of breaking his spirit. 3. The outcome of the contract seems to show that Clancy is done taking the deal Nico and the Red Eyes Josh has given him. Since the show is a flashback of why we fight before we do, the whole Clancy tour, we as fans were smeared with Tyler. But now his eyes are open and ours too. He refuses the contract and makes a new contract. Thank you for reading. Love your content. So again, this is in response to my own theory about the Torchbearer, and as I mentioned, I do somewhat disagree with this idea, obviously, because it's not exactly what I put forward. Now, I do think there is a lot here that does make sense, and I think it very much could make sense to tie the 3 versions of the Torchbearer into the triune God. However, I don't agree that the Red Eyes Josh is wholly different from the Voltsoy Josh, or the version who is a projection of Clancy's mind. That's why he shows up when Nico seizes or smears Clancy, whichever is actually going on there at the end of Paladin Strait. In that moment, we go into Clancy's mind, right? That's what happens in the contract. We're inside his mind, and there we see that version of the Torchbearer, the same one who shows up on Voltsoy and leads him in navigating and so on. And again, is the same one who leads him to the power of seizing, which I still think is not a good thing, that he was given the power of seizing, right? I believe that was kind of, it might be a necessary evil for the plot of the story, but I don't know that it was a necessary evil for Clancy himself. But I'm not fully sure if that distinction even makes sense, or if it's logical. So I'm not fully committed to that distinction there, but I am in opposition to using the power of seizing. And I do think by using that power, it is coming to corrupt Clancy. And so it isn't good that the Voltsoy Torchbearer led him to that power. And so, I don't think there's a distinction between those two. I don't think that the Voltsoy Torchbearer is that good, but I think he's better than the Scaled and Icy Torchbearer. And to the point about using yellow tape in the submarine in Saturday to tape up the holes, there could be two things going on there. One, we did see yellow tape and the color yellow in the Scaled and Icy livestream. So it's not impossible that the bishops were letting this projection of Josh use that to kind of subvert Clancy's mind and get on his side and convince him that he is the real Torchbearer, and then be able to trick him into doing the wrong thing through that. So that's one possible explanation. The other idea is that at that point, the Torchbearer we see in that moment in Saturday already is a projection of Clancy's mind. And under that, the moment Trash the Dragon strikes the submarine and it begins sinking, Nico's control of Clancy's mind is severed and cut off. And that's when his projection of the Torchbearer springs into action and brings out yellow tape and so on. Because again, that projection is not wholly evil. I mean, it's sort of amoral in a sense because it's a projection of Clancy's mind. It's not a real person. And it's not something that's being cast there, if you will, by Nico. And so it does both good and bad things and works for Nico and against Nico because it's not really doing anything of its own accord. It's sort of just Clancy's subconscious. Next up, we have a question from Capy, the bread lover, who writes, question for Perligo Ponders. Although I know this theory might be loosely tied together, I do think it works as a possible explanation. In the music video for Overcompensate, we see Clancy convincing the residents of Dema to participate in a revolt against the bishops. In Paladin Strait, though, we do not see them, nor do we see the Dema guards mentioned in the letters. I think that a following conclusion could be drawn. The role of the revolutionaries was to get rid of the guards, to clear the streets for Clancy, making getting to the bishops way easier. I know there isn't any confirmation for this, but I do think that this ties up pretty well and explains the absence of both the guards and the citizens in the Paladin Strait music video. It's not a bad point, and I think it definitely could be a good explanation for where the guards went. I'm not sure it fully clears up the answer for where the citizens went, because if the revolutionaries have taken care of the guards, certainly a small cohort would be watching those guards, guarding the guards, making sure they don't escape. But the rest of them could come and join the fight, and perhaps they will. Perhaps that will happen in the beginning of Breach. So I'm not 100% convinced that this is what happened, but to the point of the commenter, there isn't much evidence either way, and it definitely could make sense. It could tie up some of these loose ends and provide an explanation for the absence of both of these. Next up, we have a rather lengthy comment from a poet, Y6C, who writes, I'll just throw out all my thoughts and questions here. There are 4 of them. I'll endeavor to answer as many of these as fully as possible, but am a little constrained on time. So I do apologize if I miss some of them or don't fully answer a question which you pose here. Number 1, why did Clancy survive the shipwreck? Who saved him? Trash. How did Keons know Clancy would survive it? This is an interesting question, and it sort of goes hand in hand with the Keons video that I made a week or 2 ago, in which I asked, how did Clancy know that Keons was dead so that he could seize him? This is somewhat easier to answer in that we do know that Keons likely knew that Clancy was going to be on that submarine, so it makes sense that he would know to attack that submarine. But it is still worth asking, why would he attack the submarine if he's not fully convinced that Clancy is going to survive? I don't know. I don't know if there is a fully clear answer to be drawn here. I think there are 2 aspects. One, Keons might not have realized how devastating the attack was going to be, or that everyone else would have died, because that's what happened. It was kind of a terrible massacre in the end of the day, right? Only Clancy survived. Or 2, going back again to the Scaled and Icy Torchbearer versus the projection in Clancy's mind, perhaps the Scaled and Icy Torchbearer was still in play, and Keons knew that Nico wasn't going to let Clancy die that easily, at least in that context, right? If we understand that the goal of vialism is to have people sacrifice themselves during the annual assembly of the Glorious Gone, likely he would want Clancy to do that very publicly, as a symbol to all his followers, all of Clancy's followers, that this is what you should be doing. And so if he died in the bottom of the ocean in a shipwreck, that wouldn't exactly allow for Clancy to be this symbol of vialism that the bishops want to turn him into. So perhaps Keon's was simply counting on the fact, or banking on the idea, that Nico was going to save Clancy and preserve him from death no matter what. And so the Torchbearer that's still being projected by Nico at that point, if that is the case, leads Clancy to safety. And it's really Nico guiding Clancy to safety in that moment. Number 2, Clancy mentions his friends in the I Am Clancy video in a way that seems strange to me. Well, they say it's old, but there's really no proof. I can feel my friends rolling their eyes. Who are these friends? I'd guess they're banditos, but why would they think Clancy questioning the age of the city is weird? I'm afraid I don't really have a proper answer to this question, but I do think it's an interesting one, and it's crossed my mind a couple of times, or at least the aspect of it, wondering who Clancy's friends are in this context. I agree they're most likely banditos, but, it could be the Torchbearer and Ned or something, right? He could have written this as they waited for night to fully fall at the end, in that gap in the outside, right? We see him seize Keon's, and it's kind of dusk, and then at the end of the video, it's the middle of the night, and it's all dark. So he could have written that letter or that video while in the caves on Foldsoy, and so all his friends would be the Torchbearer and all the Ned creatures, and so on. Question number 3. I think the idea of getting rid of seizing to render vialism useless is a really good idea that also works really well allegorically. I don't actually expect my depression to go away. For someone with reoccurring major depressive disorder, that's a bit unreasonable. Tyler has talked about this before. You learn to better cope with your depression and anxiety instead of trying to get rid of it. That's what we saw in Clancy. The most important part of coping is learning to keep yourself alive. Becoming focused on hope enough to get rid of suicidal ideation is a more reasonable goal than getting rid of depression. That was perhaps more of a comment than a question, but I think it's a good point. And I think it's a good way of looking at the story. Question number 4. If the Neds represent creativity, why are they the ones that allow seizing? My guess on this relates to a theory I have that the bishops are like mental illness, a corrupted form of coping mechanism and human emotions. So maybe it's the misuse of the coping skill of creativity. I don't know. Feel free to use any of these in the next Perligo Ponders. So the idea, I suppose, from your 4th point is that the power of seizing itself is not inherently evil, but is a tool that's being misused by the bishops. And that could be true. My question to that, though, would be, because that would answer why the Neds have this power, and that again, a little unclear what's going on there. Who are these creatures, and why do they possess such a weird power? But if it is that the bishops are misusing the power for evil, and there is a good way to use it, why would the Neds not teach Tyler that method? Again, I'm not convinced seizing is a good thing, and that it can't do anything but corrupt Clancy. I'm not sure entirely if there's a way to make that fit into the story, but I think it's an interesting idea, and I do think it represents kind of the broader idea of vialism. Again, Clancy's mentioned that they hijacked a religion and brought in and replaced it with vialism, and also destroyed the hope that many citizens of Dema arrived with, and so on. There is this underlying idea in the story that the bishops have taken something good and corrupted it and turned it into something evil, but still has enough traces of truth in it to make it a sellable lie. Equestrian Rosie writes, I think in response to my video on the tracklister breach, and perhaps a part in there where I wondered what was going to happen in between Paladin Strait and the contract, since there's 4 tracks within there. She writes, haven't the music videos been out of chronological order in the past? I believe at least a couple of them occur out of order when compared with the song order on the albums. And that is a good point. I think it is still a little hard for some of us to conceptualize how that will work when in the past that happened on Trench. And the video which introduced us to that album was still Jumpsuit. And then the next, songs, Levitate ended the trilogy with Nico and the Niners in the middle of the trilogy, so that is out of order. But still, going from Heavy Dirty Soul, the last video from Blurry Face into the beginning of Trench. It was still the first track which started this new chapter. Whereas here we have the 5th track starting the new chapter, and then the album starts with a different video and a different story. But again, it's true. It's happened both with Trench and with Skilled and Icy. In fact, Clancy was the exception in that it went in order. So it won't be a complete shock if we get a music video for City Walls that takes place after the contract, and that's not impossible, and I don't think that's a bad way to present the videos or the album. That's the best way to tell the story through the music. I just think that while this is true, it's still somewhat different to what we've seen before in the past. Next up, we have a comment from Winter Rider X9155, who asks, "Hey Perligo, do you know why there is a 1-minute gap in Paladin Strait? I believe it's because, like Tyler said, it's a flashback. Breach will contain flashbacks, present-time moments, and a future perspective. I literally believe what I said from what we already have of Breach." I think this is a good point. I somewhat touched upon this in my video going over and talking about both the track list for Breach and the snippets we've been given of the album as a whole and all those songs. I think it's a very distinct possibility and would make a lot of sense if Breach is going to be an album which fills in some of the gaps of the story that have come before. Moments that haven't been fully explained, or moments that we just simply haven't seen before, but explain other parts of the story. Now, that's not necessarily going to be the case, and I don't think it will be a problem for the story if it's not, but I also, again, agree with this, that it's not unlikely at all that that will be what the album kind of looks like in the end. And so to the point of this comment, I think it's likely that a song off of Breach will fill in that 1-minute gap in some way in the story. And at the very least explain what's going on with the Torchbearer and the other banditos fighting outside the walls of the city while Clancy's in the tower with Nico. This is one comment from about 4 or 5 by JC Bentley B3, and he writes, "Gonna keep saying it, the Paladin tragedy story." Again, there have been 4 or 5 comments in which he said this. Bentley, if you're watching, what are you talking about? I'm lost. I'm very confused. It sounds cool. And in other videos, you've commented and said that I have confirmed or agreed with a statement in a video that I've made. What is it? What is the Paladin tragedy story? Is this a story that is in existence that you think 21 Pilots are referencing or playing off of? Is it just your term for the song Paladin Strait, the story of Clancy? What is the Paladin tragedy story? Please enlighten us. Expound further on this. I'm lost. Maybe it's very obvious to everyone else. I'm lost, personally. So, at the very least, let me know what you're talking about. Thank you. With that being said, that wraps up this episode of Perligo Ponders. As always, if you have any comments, questions, or theories that you would like featured and answered in a video like this, comment them down below. Feel free to flag them as a question for Perligo Ponders if you would like. I obviously don't just pull from comments like that, but I do, for the most part, try to include every comment with that flag if possible. Again, don't always get around to answering or including every single comment, even if I do think it has a good question, but I try to include as many as possible. This month, again, the month in review, as it were, of July is going to be split into 2 episodes. So there's this one, and then next Wednesday there will be the second part of July in review, the next episode of Perligo Ponders. At some point, I might stop making it a monthly thing. We've consistently 2 months in a row had more comments than can really fit into one video, so we'll see what we'll go with there. Perhaps I'll space them out a bit more, do a mid-month and an end-of-month kind of thing. So let me know if you have a preference either way. I doubt you feel strongly, but if you do, feel free to let me know. I don't personally feel strongly about when exactly these episodes fall, but perhaps having a mid-month episode would allow me to answer some of these in a more timely fashion than wrapping it all up at the end of the month. Some months, like August, might be a bit busier, more might happen, and so July was a bit quieter, so responding to some of these at the end of the month doesn't really make a big difference in terms of the relevance of the comments. But again, something more might happen in August, and certainly with Breach coming out in September, it could make more sense to do something there, although I doubt I'll get around to doing a mid-month Perligo Ponders episode in the middle of September. With Breach coming out towards the middle of September, I'll be pretty busy talking about that album and everything that is coming out with that, and I'm sure most people will be as well. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, make sure to subscribe for more music commentary and reviews.